I could.
I could be wrong.
I could.
I could.
I could be wrong.
I could be wrong.
I could be.
I could.
I could be wrong.
Could be.
I could be.
I could be.
You know, I could be wrong.
Hey everyone, welcome back to I Could Be Wrong podcast with myself, Matthew Johnson, and our guest always, our guest. Can I even say our guest when it's both of us? We are each other's guests. Yeah. I don't know. Michael and I. Michael and I always sit down and just talk about topics that are interesting to us, some that are current events. We try to do it in a way to model what a good conversation could look like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have to be honest, most of the time we agree on everything. Today might be one of the few that I wouldn't say we disagree as much as we have different standards.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And so we're looking forward to doing it. But let me just start. How you doing?
Doing good. I got called out on that today. I said I was recording I Could Be Wrong, and I think it was Molly. She goes, "Do you mean we agree?" I'm like, well, it's not that we always agree. I just think, you know.
Hold on, I got to ask, did she say it like this? Oh, you guys always agree?
That's exactly how she said it. That would have been the better name. And I was like, okay, whatever.
All right, well, it's funny because Molly called me out too. She goes, recently you were talking about something. I'm not going to say what it was specifically, but she goes, you were talking on the podcast. You spoke in vague terms, but you were talking about me. And it was funny because I do sometimes just call her out by name. But,
yeah.
All right, so we always start off with a hot take. This has nothing to do with our podcast at all.
Sure.
A good hot take is a little bit on the edge, like where it might offend someone, but you're not trying to get
If
emails.
you're nervous to say it, I think that means it's a good hot take.
Yeah. So you want to start off or you want me to start?
I can start off. So in the spirit of what I just said, I don't feel like I'm the most qualified person to say this. So it's a little nerve-wracking, but I think that the WNBA
oh man.
That could go so many ways. I think the WNBA would be far more successful if they lowered the hoop.
Okay.
Or
You're
in
going
women's
direction.
college basketball. Yeah, I'm not saying it needs to be gone.
I like
I'm
this.
not taking
I like
the
this.
The fact, so, you know, March Madness, right? Like when you know, I'm watching the whole thing. If it's on, I'm watching it.
Yes.
Men's, women don't care. It's on. And I'm watching, and the lack of ability just to like, just run it up and dunk it.
Sure.
That's one of the most thrilling parts of basketball. If they were to just lower it to 9 feet, 8.5, I don't know what the math needs to be, right?
Yeah.
Something proportionate so that people could dunk it and have like really meaningful like drives at the basket. I think I would watch it all the time. Like there's something missing about the high action aspect to see somebody post or somebody.
Right.
When that's not in it, it's just boring to me. You know what I mean?
First, no, you wouldn't watch it all the time. Let's be honest with that. But no, I 100% agree though.
Volleyball, they lower the net. I learned that recently.
Exactly.
So
no,
we
I
play,
would say the same thing.
a couple of us play volleyball on staff, and I realized recently it's for the women's standard net, and I felt really embarrassed because I was really proud of myself. I'm like, oh, I can actually spike on this net. That's why.
No, I agree. So even in basketball, women use a smaller ball, which makes sense. It's lighter,
exactly what
it's
Kenny
smaller
said.
for their hands.
Yeah.
No, I think it's a great perspective. Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the problems with the WNBA, which is funny, Mary and I'll tell you some things I've said in younger years that were not the best, but even this morning, we were working out. So it's a bunch of our staff are together working out before work. And Mick, I got to think about this conversation. So we started talking about how the WWE is, you know, like fake wrestling or whatever. We're talking about that. And Mick was like, he goes, this is Mick's hot take. Okay. So I'm calling him out on this.
Sure.
He goes, the WWE is like gymnastics. And he goes, it's not really a sport that I want to watch or something like that. And like everyone's like, you just compared fake wrestling to gymnastics. Now, Mary was a phenomenal gymnast.
Sure.
And
deeply
Mary's like,
offensive. Basically, the better comparison is like it's like a soap opera or something like it's all fake. It's all gymnastics. It's like a very hard sport.
Yeah, real high skill. And so Mary, but then so like we all kept teasing Mick because he kept trying to explain it away, and I was like, dude, you're in a hole. Stop digging. You know? And then, but Mary goes, she goes, oh, the reason why people don't watch the WNBA, and she started saying like it's because like they've been told it's not as good or whatever. And I was like, you know, I'm going to disagree with you on that one. And here's what I was going to say. One of the things is just as a culture is you do want to engage the highest level of something.
I agree.
Right. So like you don't want to watch American Idol with a bunch of mediocre singers, right?
Totally
like
agree.
you want to see the highest level. In basketball, the problem is you do have incredible athleticism at a different level with the guys' version of it because they're playing at a height. So that basket was raised to 10 feet because they're athletic enough to jump higher than that.
Yeah.
So like when I went to college and played basketball, in my high school, there were guys that could get above the rim. In college, the game was above the rim. Like every rebound's above the rim. Like everyone's dunking.
Which is such a crazy thought.
It's completely different. Guys are doing jump shots and they're jumping 10 feet in the air before they release it. And so it's a completely different game. I agree. Women's basketball would be much more
Make it so the game
engaging.
can be played above the rim like that.
Right,
Make it
exactly.
so it's more.
So I agree with that. One of the dumb things I said to Mary, though I stand by this, when I was in college.
It's dumb, but I believe it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I got out of college and I'd played basketball in college, and Mary and I went to a WNBA game, and I courtside tickets because it was, wasn't hard to get.
Yeah.
And we watched it and we got done, and I was like, I could not only play in the WNBA right now, I could dominate it.
Sure. How did Mary feel about that?
And she was like, no, you couldn't. And I was like, I could. And she was like, no. So like from that moment to now, we've had this discussion like 100 times. Here's the thing. I'm 43 years old and I'm still convinced I could. Like not dominate it.
Put me in, coach.
Yeah, I was like, I wouldn't stand out as bad.
I can be a role player. I'll make it work.
All right. So here's my hot take. My hot take is general education should end at the end of middle school. And high school should just be specialized education. So let me get where I'm at, sure. Okay? In middle school, you're basically learning all you need to know to function well in life, in the sense of like, at that point, you should have learned addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, like the basics of fundamental math that everything is built on.
Yeah.
You start transitioning somewhat in middle school, but more so in high school into like algebra and stuff like that. But middle school gives you enough that are you gifted in that or not? Are you interested in that or not? Yeah. Same thing with like sciences and English and different things. Here's the problem is you get into high school, and by that point, people aren't good at something. Mm-hmm. And we have this weird mindset in America that whatever you're bad in, give that the most attention.
Super good.
And actually, people won't do that in life. So like, if I'm not good, like the class I struggled with the most in high school, bar none, and this was just, I struggled with it, was chemistry.
I almost failed high school because of chemistry.
Yeah, it was a concept that my brain could not grasp onto. I got tutored and stuff.
Me too. Yeah.
So it was really obvious to me that's never a field I'm going to go into.
Yeah.
But then there could be something else. So like allow high schoolers to figure out where they're most gifted in, and then let's fan that flame. So like if someone, like even in the career center, in a specific, trade that they want, or someone's really good in English. Yeah. And once they've learned like a basic general ed, and maybe have an exam that they have to pass that's like shows in general ed, and then focus on whatever you want. So I just think we spend and waste so much time and destroy kids.
I think I agree. I think it destroys confidence. So I think like I was forced to do so many classes that I didn't connect to, that I never, and everyone, so I understand there's two sides of it. So for me, I used to always vent and be like, when am I ever going to use this? Never. I'm never going to use algebra 2. I'm never going to use chemistry. Right. I had a teacher tell me once that it's not that you're ever going to use chemistry. It's that your ability to be disciplined and problem solve you'll use forever.
Sure.
I thought that made sense, but it didn't make sense enough for me to like still agree. It's like, that might be true, but I can also build the same resolve in something that I'm going to actually use.
Right. Yeah. I would say, I feel like that could be accomplished with something else. And think about how many kids. So like, let me give an example. This is not targeted toward anyone. If a person is like phenomenal at writing, okay,
sure,
but awful at science, awful at math, so their grades look like A in like the English style classes, C's and D's in those other things, and maybe they're not athletic either, so like they're even struggling in gym class or something. That person will convince themselves they're unintelligent, they're not a good student, whatever 100%. It might be. And in my mind, I'm like,
they might be a brilliant writer.
They might be a brilliant writer. Yeah. They might be a brilliant individual. They're just not good in those areas. And so like, that's the part of it where
it's kind of a weird value system.
And maybe middle school is too young. Maybe it's freshman year. And then like same thing in college, you get some general ed and then you major in something. But I think that should start earlier. And I think it'd be good for confidence. And I think even it would make our country better because I think people would become really specialized.
100%. And something else that like, it's not so much about being specialized. I remember the rage that I felt when I bought my first house. I was so embarrassed. I bought my first house and I left my hose outside all year. So if you're not from Ohio, that's where we record this podcast from. That's where our church is located in Ohio, where the weather is volatile. It goes from like hot in the summer, freezing cold in the winter. I left my hose outside, and whatever water was left in the hose froze, and it blew my water line in my basement.
Yeah.
I called a plumber and he had to come fix it. And he was like, yeah, never leave your hose through the winter. And I was like, do you think someone should have told me that once in my whole life, Yeah. And I'm pretty privileged. I had a 2-parent home. Yeah. I had a dad who probably knew that. He just somehow slipped and like forgot to tell me that. There's some people who have no idea. I came from like 2-parent home and I had no idea about that.
Sure,
the volume of things as a homeowner, or even about my finances, like taxes are ridiculous to be like, where the government's like, you have to figure out how much. I'm like, well, can you tell me? They're like, we know, but we're not going to tell you.
Right,
you have to figure out how much.
Out.
And if you guess wrong, then we're going to, we'll sue you, whatever. It's just that kind of education too. I don't know how to do it. I'm not like a social scientist, but I wish that was worked into education as well. How to just be a person, how to own a home, how to do
we should do another
maintenance.
podcast just on this.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah. All right, so here's what we're going to talk about today. So last week we talked about the idea of consumption in general, like spending money, and how that impacts us and what motivates us to spend money. Today, I want to talk about content consumption and how it impacts our heart and our lives.
Super good.
When I say content, I'm talking about anything that we take in any media form. So this is the movies we watch, TV we watch, books we read, magazines we read,
music we listen
to, websites we go to, social media, anything that we're consuming and how it impacts us. So I just got back from a week of counseling, told the church I was going. Mary and I went, and it was like one part for me, one part for us as a married couple. One of the things that's like super clear in counseling is the experiences of your life continue to impact you. Like, so we know that. So like whether it's positive or negative, if you have someone say something to you when you're younger, if someone insults you, if someone compliments you, like we both have stories of that. Like there's a person that impacted both you and Mary Stalter, that she just really spoke to you words of life that really shaped your guys' future.
Absolutely.
Like you guys have ministry in you, you're going into the ministry. Yeah. So you have moments like that, but we could both then quote the negatives, the things that impact us. The reason I'm saying all of that is we understand this in counseling. I think a person that starts to really wrestle with their mental health and emotional health recognizes things that from your past impact you. Okay, so we get that in a general concept, right? Sure. I don't think we give enough weight to the day-by-day things that we're consuming and how it impacts us. Yeah. So I'm gonna speak on a more spiritual level. So I realize not everyone that engages the podcast has a Christian faith, but that's my faith, that's my conviction. Jesus said a couple of things. So in the book of Matthew specifically, he said, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And he was talking about this idea that like, whatever goes into our heart. And when he says heart, he's talking about that central place of who we are. It's like the mixture of our mental and emotional and spiritual. And he's like, that really is the motivating factor of our lives. In Matthew 15, there's this moment where the Pharisees come. The Pharisees are religious leaders. They come to Jesus and they're offended because his disciples did not wash their hands before they ate. Now, I want to be clear. This was not based on germs. This is before they understood that concept. They didn't do ritualistic cleaning, which was not in the Bible. It was according to what the Pharisees and religious leaders had set up. They didn't do the washing of their hands, these practices. And so they were saying to them, you guys are defiled. And Jesus goes, it's not what goes into your mouth that makes you defiled. He's like, and they weren't like, even his own disciples were like, we don't fully get what you're saying. He goes, all right, let me just be really clear. You eat something, it goes in your body, it goes out your body. Like he says, like you go to the bathroom. He goes, what really defiles a person is what comes out of the heart. And, and then he says, like, what they speak comes out of the heart. But then he just goes through this, like, list of sins, sexual immorality and greed and lust. Like, all these things come out of the heart. So the real question that I'm wrestling with and I want to talk about is this idea of, like, all the stuff we're consuming is going into that central place. Because all the stuff we're consuming, let's be honest, it does impact us mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Like we know this, like music, which you're so gifted in, you know, by the chords that you write in a song, how it's going to impact the 100%. Listener. Yeah. All songs don't sound the same.
Can I give you like a really small example? Yeah, this is a funny example of but the power of how something can impact your mood in general, I think is worth stating. And this is like a funny way to do it, but I would challenge you, if you ever get bored enough to do it, to go to YouTube and type in Jaws without the music, the movie Jaws, which like it's already looks kind of dated at this point, but there was something so menacing about those two notes. It's written by John Williams. He's like maybe the greatest composer of all time, but just that dun dun. To this day, that's how I go to tickle my kids. I'm like boom boom. I'm like, oh crap! Like there's something that strikes fear about those two notes. And there's something about, even if you just see this small movement in the water, when you hear that boom, boom, it's like, oh my gosh, something's happening. Yeah. So when you mute it, it's so funny. People will mute it and just add water sounds. So it's just like awkwardly quiet. You can hear like the motor of the boat. Music has such a powerful emotional response for us. You know, so even just something silly like that in a movie can make or break how you feel, how your emotional response is to what you're visually seeing. For sure. Which is cool. God made it that way. Music's a powerful tool. That's why we sing songs, you know. But yeah, that's very real. I saw
a video actually just a couple weeks ago when it's Steven Spielberg who made Jaws and John Williams, and Steven Spielberg was talking about when he came to show him the song. So like at this point, John Williams actually wasn't famous. Now he's like a legendary composer.
Probably the best of all time.
Right. So if he comes to your house and plays you something, you're like, sure, whatever it is, you're, but this is before he's really famous. And he came over, so he called Steven Spielberg and he's like, I want to play this. And he came over and it's just two notes on the piano. Dun, dun.
Then a long pause and another one.
And Steven Spielberg thought he was messing with them and was like, come on. And he's like, no, I'm serious. So,
man, the genius of that though, because that does sound silly when you first hear it.
Yeah.
You remember the worship song was really huge. This is Amazing Grace.
Yeah.
Jeremy Riddle, who you and I really both like as a worship leader, he co-wrote that song. So he has a funny story about that where somebody came into and pitched that chorus and he hated it. He goes, this is Amazing Grace. This is a failing. Like, there's such a long pause, and Jeremy Riddle's response is like, it'll never be a hit. Nobody cares about that. You can't just let people sit there for 20 seconds.
Right.
And lo and behold, it was like the biggest worship song probably 3 years in a row.
Yeah.
Like if you went to any church in that time period, it was the biggest ever. But it's interesting when you see something that people can gauge so wrong, where maybe if you talk about top 5 most memorable soundtracks, you're going to talk about Jaws.
Yeah.
Worship music, this one that Jeremy Riddle, a fantastic worship leader, is like, it'll never work.
Right. Missed it.
Yeah.
All right. So it's not just music though. Like everything that we watch, I mean, like you watch a comedy, it can lift your spirits. You watch something that's very scary, it can make you anxious, right? You watch something, I mean, we get this. Okay. Here's my tension. So this is what I want to wrestle with is what's our response? What's our response to this? Because, and this is where you and I'm going to say we have different standards. Now I want to pause, and I really do want to put this disclaimer out.
Sure.
I would imagine a lot of our listeners are going to agree with your perspective. A lot are going to agree with mine. Yeah. And I would say even you and I aren't super consistent in this. So this isn't me trying to act one way and throw you under the bus and vice versa. But like you can listen to and enjoy musical artists that I would never listen to.
100%. Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
Even in, not just style, I'm saying even in content. Yeah. Like you're going to appreciate things about music that I don't. And so for me, music, I'm probably 99% into lyrics more so than the musicals. That's wrong statistics, but you know what I'm saying.
No,
like,
totally, yeah.
Because I don't have the skill. So like you can play something for me and then point something out and I go, okay, I hear it now that you say it. Sure. But I wouldn't have caught that. So like I'm more listening to the lyrics.
Well, that's famously not an argument, but a tension you and I have had over the years of our worship on Sunday mornings, which is like, this is like probably 50% of every time we've ever talked about a front of house mix. If you don't know what that is, front of house means what you're actually hearing in the room, not in your monitors or online. So this is Matthew's 50% of the time his note is like, I just feel like I can't hear the vocalist well enough. Yeah. Because you put such a high priority, most things in regards to my department in function over creativity, right. But especially with lyrics, like that's the whole point of like what we're ministering. Yeah. Turn the vocals up. Even if you have to turn everyone else down, that's fine. Yeah. So I felt that where it's so obvious you put such a high value on what is actually being taught, what's actually being sung, what's actually being said.
Okay, but even that phrase, that's a phrase that we use, shows the difference in our personalities, is I do say function first, creativity second. Yeah. When it comes to when we're trying to accomplish something, with
which isn't my initial bent. I understand the logic of it, and now like that is also my belief for church work. But that doesn't mean that's how my brain naturally works. That's a learned behavior that I've had to learn the wisdom of. That's not how that's not my default.
So a lot of, and I've known this from listening to their podcasts or them in videos and stuff. A lot of musical artists. So like in the world, no one blinks an eye at this, but when you talk about worship leaders, a lot of worship leaders listen to artists that I'm kind of shocked by. Sure. You know, I'm like, really? You're listening to that hip hop artist, you'll listen to this, where I know some of their music, I would just say
it's profanity or it's it's
inappropriate
like a disrespectful
from my perspective.
Message. Yeah, sure.
And you hear them talk about it, but again, for them, it's a part of their craft. It's a part of like, they understand and appreciate the musicality of it. Yeah. It also helps them become better musicians. So there's that dynamic. And then also like, so there's that, you also like I don't know if you like horror movies, but
I love horror movies.
Yeah, yeah.
So I have to moderate it, but I do like. That's again, it's like my natural bet is I enjoy those movies. Yeah,
I don't. Yeah, you know, like it's not something. No, I like some of the more subtle ones that are scary, like
a thriller, something that boils the pot or suspense. Like
what's the one? The same movie guy made the movie Nope. I haven't seen Nope, but
Get Out.
Get Out, yeah. Like,
or I know you liked Invisible Man, which is like a suspense movie where it's not necessarily horror, but it's like, you get like the intensity of it.
Oh, yeah. I love it. So I can do that. But so again, we have these different standards. The reason why I say it though is you're obviously a mature disciple of Jesus Christ. You're a leader. You have a great relationship with God. You're a healthy person. We have different standards, but what is it? And again, I don't have an answer. So this is not a podcast where I'm going to, sometimes we do, we get done and we're like, okay, here's 6 steps you need to do. Yeah. That's not what this is about. As much as I'm curious to pick your brain on this, to say, what's your thoughts on, and just in case everyone wants to know, Michael and I, we send out topics to each other, and we don't have this discussion ahead of time. Mm-hmm. We were like, so I'm really when I say picking your brain, this isn't
times where we'll want to talk about something like, let's wait till we're on the podcast. Cause
exactly.
Make it more
and this is one
organic.
of those. Yeah. So you sent out a topic, I tweaked it and said, I would like this angle.
Yeah.
Okay. How do you, let me just ask you, how do you monitor what is acceptable? Because here's what I'm going to imagine. I'm going to imagine there are times where you're like, nope, that's too much.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Too much music, this movie, this TV show. What's like your method that you go through? Sure. I have mine, but I want to hear yours first.
Sure. Even before I say that, can I give a little bit of context of how I arrived at my thing? So for me, you grew up, and I grew up in a very similar, you grew up probably childhood's mostly in the 80s, mine's mostly in the 90s. But it has a lot of similar Christian cultural themes. So it started with your generation, but it really was still very relevant in mine, was the demon scare that really was founded in the 80s but continued into the 90s. So there's a demon behind every corner.
Right.
Dungeons & Dragons is evil. Secular music, if you play Stairway to Heaven backwards, like there's all this stuff was inundated into my childhood of people thinking like subliminal messaging in music. And my whole childhood, I was born and raised in the church, was that secular music is evil and wicked and awful. And that, and it was so, and when I was a kid, I would have been like, yeah, it is. Like, I'm glad I don't listen to it. And I remember I had 2 formative moments that it all kind of fell apart for me, where I started to ask more questions about, well, why is this bad? What does this mean? One of them is I found my mom's, she bought the first iPod, right?
Okay.
And she stone cold lied to me about it. So I grabbed her iPod because I wanted to listen to it while I was mowing the lawn. I was probably like 11 or like 12, something like that. And I grabbed the iPod, and it had just bangers on it, like great music that I'd never heard in my life. At this point, I'm listening to Carmen, like FFH, and all of a sudden she has this little, which podcast we're brand new, is the first podcast, or iPod. And I'm like, and it had like Crazy Town, it had like all this like dope stuff, and I was like, what is this? Then I asked her, like, what is this music? She goes, I got it from work, and it came with those songs. I don't listen to them. I don't want you listening to them. I asked her as an adult. I'm like, that's not how that works. They wouldn't preload music. She's like, oh yeah, I love that music. She's like, Crazy Town's my favorite. It's like, Mom, you can't lie to me. But I just remember thinking like, that was fishy. And it was the first time I was really introduced to secular music, because at this point, this is pre-internet. You know what I mean? I didn't have a home computer in my house. I have no way to find this stuff. I'm going to a record store. I'm with my parents. You're not allowed to listen to secular radio. So I was so like blown away, like, oh, this is rad. And so then I just started to distrust the whole system. I'm like, now I just feel like they're keeping cool stuff from me. Like, I feel like, I don't feel like this is right or wrong. I was so angry. The other thing that I felt was so silly is that I didn't understand what TV shows, I'm outing them so hard right now. They were great parents, but I didn't understand the TV shows they watched.
Stories.
Like my mom, I don't even say what show. My mom loved this show that was just sketchy in nature. It was like at the time, like a I don't remember what the name was. It was like a Desperate Housewives type show, just like trashy television. And I remember thinking like, but I can't listen to Simon and Garfunkel, but like that's okay. And I felt this at a young age, and now I have more understanding and nuance to the thought. But I felt this deep hypocrisy of like, okay, secular TV shows are acceptable, but a song isn't. It feels like we're gatekeeping cool stuff. I'm like, and I'm such a black and white person at times. I'm like, you either take all of it or you take none of it. I'm like, I need a rule to say why this is wrong and why this is okay. And if you don't, then I'm just going to ignore you completely. And that's the way that my young brain worked. And it's something I actually still have to battle to this day. Like just that not living that black and white all in or all out space, which is why this conversation is important. So then I stumbled into a bunch of cool bands, fell in love with music. And the worst case scenario happened, it started to impact the way that I was thinking. And then you kind of realize that why that stuff matters. Why when I was young, the point of their message was true, even if it was handled in an incorrect way. Let me summarize it.
Sure. So you went from ultra strict, kind of pendulum swing, to the other, maybe other extreme.
The other extreme.
And then you start to realize, okay, there is some wisdom to it. And this is a great part of it. 100%. There's some wisdom, but not necessarily to go back to the ultra strict.
100%.
But you have to find something that works.
It was that exact pendulum. I had none of it, then I had all of it. And I remember I had a moment specifically, I'll never forget it. I was probably 17 years old, and there was a band I loved. I went through waves. I really loved hip hop, and so I'd sneak it. Like after this iPod moment, I would sneak. Wu-Tang Clan was like my favorite. I loved hip hop. I grew up in downtown Akron. So this is like the music of like what you would hear in cars. And I was like, once I figured out how to get access to it, I would illegally download stuff from like LimeWire and all this stuff. But I went from that to all of a sudden, like the countercultural movement shifted and emo became cool. And I started listening to hardcore music and death metal. And like, there's a band called Suicide Silence. I'll never forget this moment. And I loved it. It was so heavy. It was like sludge metal. It was like really dark stuff. And I was angry. And I'm like, this sounds like the way I feel. And I love it. But I heard a lyric through what he was saying, or maybe I read on the back of that CD, because you could barely you've heard Screamo music, you can barely articulate what they're saying. It's going to sound like I'm making this up, but I promise you can Google it. This was the lyric. It was a song called Bludgeoned or something like that. And the lyric was sewing the eyes shut of the man who saw God. Basically talking about killing a pastor. Like that was the theory of the song, is this was such an anti-establishment band that they were so hateful towards religious leaders. I think specifically about the Catholic Church, because he grew up, I don't remember the whole story. But he's like, all pastors should die. Like that's how angry I am. And I remember I read that lyric, or I articulated it, and I just felt so sad. Yeah. And I felt this conviction from the Holy Spirit of like, and almost like a mourning, where I felt like God was like, I gave that man such an incredible gift to be able to craft this song. And that's what he chose to do with it.
Yeah, right.
And then here was the next part where I felt this very clear word from the Holy Spirit was like, and he will be held accountable for that.
Yeah.
Like for the kids like me who would feel that and like lead music, like as a musician, I'm probably going to put too much stock in it, but I do think music is a powerful gift to steward. But with a powerful gift comes a lot of accountability. Like you have influence in the way you make music. Yeah. And you mentioned we can craft songs to make people feel stuff. 100%. I know I could write a song to make you feel sad. Like I can write it in a minor key. I can write it in a slower tempo.
Yeah, that's what I say. Google any song in minor key.
It's going to sound sad.
It sounds sad.
It can sound angry, it can sound dark, it can sound depressing. Yeah. My mom told me as a kid, I'd listen to stuff. She'd go, I just feel like it's very indulgent. It's like you're just indulging this sadness and allowing yourself to like feel all these dark things. So that was this aggressive swing back. And then I got saved when I was 17, and I started to shift back to the middle of like, I want to consume stuff that I don't feel like that check from the Holy Spirit. And then from there, my middle point where I really landed then, and I haven't really changed much from this, is articulating, what is this leading me into? Is me listening to this music making me feel sad? I should probably not feel that. I should probably like, I don't know that that's the desire of the Holy Spirit. Absolutely.
Okay. So that's my story. That's my background. That's your background. So I'm gonna give you my background a little bit too. So what's funny is very similar. If anyone hasn't watched this, there's a funny comedy special, Nate Bargatze. It's his one that's on Amazon Prime.
It's the newest one, right?
His newest one. And he talks about, he was raised with Christian parents in the 90s. He's like, they were the most Christian of the Christian parents, whatever. It's a pretty funny part if you were raised at that time. So in our home, we could not listen to secular music either, which is anything non-Christian.
Your brother was telling me you couldn't even listen to Michael W. Smith because there's electric guitar.
Yeah, because it was too much. And which you go back and listen to it now, it's cheesy, right?
Yeah, it's pretty dorky.
So there was, at that time, the Demon Around Every Corner, there was this double VHS cassette thing that came out called Hell's Bells, where it exposed all the evil of the secular world. And we would watch that over and over and over and over again. You know why? To listen to the secular songs. And because my brother Chris loved it, he would listen to it. But because it was like
they'd
exposing,
play samples of it, to expose it,
right? I remember watching of it, and my parents would be like, "Well, they're really taking this to heart." It's like, yeah, we're listening.
They're really convicted.
So like that was our, and I remember. So when I first started dating Mary, this is how far into my life this went. So Mary and I started dating when I was a freshman, but like within a year or two when we were dating, I realized not only did Mary listen to secular music, which I did. Like I didn't obey my parents; I did it in secret, but Mary did. But then when I found out that her mom did, I was like, I mean, I really had a moment where my brain like could not comprehend
you're a Christian
that
and you
because her parents are solid Christians. Wow. I mean, like spirit-filled, like wonderful, like the standard of Christians, the nicest people, godly people, take their faith genuine, raise godly kids. And I was like, so your mom, like you guys listen, and it wasn't like they're not listening to like trashy music, but I'm like, you listen to like hits of the 80s and 90s on your way to school together with your mom. Like wild. I could not. And then like, Mary, you don't have to hide it at your house. You can just have the radio going. And that was honestly the point where it started to challenge my understanding of it. And then like, I remember even going to Bible college. So all the way through high school, I hid it from my parents, like listening to secular music and stuff. Then I remember even going to Bible college. There used to be a store called Blockbuster Music. So not Blockbuster Video, but
like
Blockbuster.
A whole different location.
It didn't last very long. But their whole thing was you could go in, and they had in the middle of the stores, it was really like a little bit nicer than even a Blockbuster Video. In the middle of the store, they had like a circular thing, and there were headphones, and you could bring any CD up there that you want. They would open it and allow you to listen to it before you bought it, which there was nothing like that. So you could listen to the whole CD before you bought something. And so in college, I didn't want to buy the CD, but I wanted to listen to it. I remember going in and listening to Jay-Z. Like, it was like one of his first, so whatever his good album came out in like 97, 98.
The Blueprint, yeah.
And so like listening to it and listening to some other stuff and then like really wrestling with, like, I liked it, but then I felt bad and like that tension. And that's what started my journey, where I was like, I have to figure out, because especially when I went into full like adulthood on my own, where like I'm setting the standard now. Yeah. And I was like the same thing. Like, I don't know that I went to an extreme.
Which is a weird, that is a weird tension to feel. Like this is literally what I define as the value for my, we talked a little bit that where my thing with littering, where I was like, what do I actually believe here? Like what, no one's going to get, I'm not in trouble right now. What do I believe is right?
For sure. Yeah. And then you're going to go through this a little bit more as your kids get older. But as my kids started getting older, what's my standard on secular music? What's my standard on what they watch? And how do I define that? And even like things I prefer them not be exposed to, but realizing they're going to be exposed. Yeah. So like even part of this discussion, maybe we'll get to like the parental side of it, but where I'm like, it's inevitable they're going to get exposed. So can they even, is it a healthy thing to think about? Can I expose them in a proper way? Yeah. In a safe way? That's
a great question.
And so those are some of the things. Okay. So we both had this like ultra strict, went to freedom, then kind of found our value system. Yeah. So now let me ask you specifically, I would say music and movies have some similarities, but there's some uniqueness. Like in movies, both can have foul language, both can have bad themes. Movies are going to have a visual side to it, so there can be killing, there can be nudity, things like that. Okay, absolutely. So there's some differences to it. Let's just start with music first.
Love it. Yeah.
The themes, the foulness of it, the way it impacts your moods and stuff. Yeah. What's the standard? How do you kind of work through that?
For sure. Believe it or not, I have a different feeling about music than movies. We can talk about movies in a second. I'll talk about how it's different. But for music, at least, I have a conviction in my heart that is, and it could be problematic at times. I'm not going to say this is for everybody. It could just be my own arrogance, which I'm willing to say is certainly prevalent in my life in small ways, big ways, whatever. I have my own belief that, like, you know how we always give ourselves more credit than you think? Like, well, I'm like mentally tough enough to be able to articulate everything all the time, but the reality is sometimes we just don't.
And you know what's funny? You're probably experiencing right now when you know you're about to say it out loud and clearly define it.
Like, do I actually feel like that? Yeah, absolutely.
Do I actually? And is that good? That's how I was this week.
For real. But for me, I have a conviction that all beautiful things, whether the author of the beautiful thing knows it or not, can point to the Father in an edifying way, depending on how you are consuming the content. Right. I'm trying to think of like one of the first examples I really remember that happening, but I remember. Oh, I actually know exactly what it was. There was a band called Mumford & Sons, and they came out when I was a senior in high school, and they blew up. They like won a Grammy. It was huge. They won a Grammy after that, but I remember I got like an early demo of something. I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And I was conflicted because I got saved, and I was like, I don't want to fill my mind, and I don't want to put all these things in my heart because I know what goes into what's going to come out. And I was trying to justify lyrically why I was okay with it. And Mumford & Sons is very chill. Like if you listen to their lyrics, he grew up in the Vineyard movement. So he's like, and he really writes about a faith experience that's not vulgar or crass. But I was trying to figure out my values of like, I don't want to put stuff in my mind and heart. And what I realized, I had this moment listening to a specific song called Sigh No More, where I remember thinking like, whether this guy is saved or not, this is beautiful. And God gave him this ability. And when I hear it, it makes me think of the Lord. So that's generally my approach to music in general. Whether or not the author made this as something or not that was supposed to edify me or glorify God, it breaks my heart that they might not know that that's why God gave them this ability to edify people and to glorify God. But I can still be edified by it and think like, man, isn't it special that God gave someone this ability? I think so, and that's something that sticks with me to this day, where I'll hear something cool, and my default response, especially emotionally to music, where I hear something and it makes me feel something, I feel happy, or it reminds me of a nostalgic time in life, or like I got dogged on yesterday in the office because I was playing 90s Christian CCM stuff, so I was like in the mood for it, but it made me feel like nostalgic. It made me remind of being a kid. It doesn't, whether secular Christian, it doesn't matter. If it makes me feel like this thing, I attribute that to the Father. I'm like, God, thank you for giving us beautiful things. And I think where that argument can hold up is when you think about physical art. When you look at something beautiful, like a painting, like usually people aren't interested in like, unless real art lovers, actually the background maybe makes it better, but a lot of people can just enjoy it. Like, what a beautiful painting. Doesn't matter if the person knew God or not. What I know is that beautiful thing reminds me of God's creation, So that's my thing with music. Now, where it becomes sinful to me is directly in response to, is this leading me into sin? Is this leading me into closer to the Father or farther away. If I can listen to it and appreciate it and say like, man, I love beautiful stuff. God is so cool. But all of a sudden, if I'm listening to hip hop, right? Hardcore theme in hip hop is a deep-seated disdain for the police. Different conversation, whether that's warranted or not. Whole different, like a different podcast, right?
Sure.
But if I listen to that and all of a sudden I feel myself being angry, I don't need to listen to that. Right. You know what I mean? Like I want to be so. If I listen to
there are certain themes in hip hop that are consistent. High sexuality, drugs,
say objectifying women, drugs, criminal activity in general, violence. So if I'm listening to something and it makes me feel angry, resentful, upset. Same thing with sad music. I have a whole playlist. I love making playlists. It's like borderline a hobby. So I'll get on Spotify and make it like mood driven. It's like I'll almost like pretend like I'm scoring a movie. Like this is what a 90s camping trip would sound like. And I'll make a playlist. So it's not genre specific. It's more like mood. You know?
You shared some of them. I have some of my favorite ones.
I love that. I love doing that. But I have stuff that I know, like if I overindulge in it, I'm going to get sad. I have one called Underneath the Bridge. It's a Nirvana lyric. A really sad song. It's what was in that Batman movie that came out a couple years ago. So I named the playlist after that. It's like listen to once a year. I don't listen to it again because I know I'll get indulgent and I'll know I'll get sad. And there's a time and place for that. God made music in minor keys. He provided that for us. Sometimes there's space for it. But if anything ever I feel like is leading me into sin, but not even just that. If anything's pulling me away from the presence of God, it's not just leading me into sin. I guess here's the better way to say it. Is this making me focus on beauty? Is this leading me? Is this helping me keep an eye towards holiness? Is it helping me keep an eye towards beauty? Is it helping me keep an eye on how generous God was by giving us like the gift of music? The second that it just makes me angry, then it's like, this is not healthy for me right now.
Right.
That's largely how I moderate what's healthy for me. Movies, it's a little different. There's some concrete stuff where I don't play games with, where it's like, I just don't do that. You know what I mean?
Sure, right. Okay, so
I hope that makes sense. But that's
100% kind of does. Yeah, I interrupted you before because you're about to say a point, and then you've now illustrated the point without saying the point. In order to be healthy in this rhythm, you actually have to have a goal, and that's what you were starting to say. You were saying like I can't remember the term you used, like the purpose or goal, and I know you well enough to know I knew where you're going.
Yeah.
But like we can't. So the same way in finances, you have a budget. You have a goal that you base your budget on, right?
Super good. Yeah.
There has to be a similar concept then, even in your capacity, emotional bandwidth, mental bandwidth of like understanding where I ultimately want to be.
Yeah.
So the phrase you kept using is the idea of either closer to God or further from God.
Yeah.
So there are elements, and I would add something, and I don't think you would push back on that. So there are some things that are going to obviously pull you away from biblical principles, godly character. There are some things that are going to obviously lead you that way. There are some things in there that are kind of subjective. But there's also, I would imagine, somewhere in the middle, there's just some neutral stuff. Like some things aren't, like you can listen to it. Like for me, when I listen to like 60s music, 70s, 50s, 60s, the pop or even bubblegum pop, I've heard it referred to, like it doesn't feel like that's leading you one way or another. Absolutely. Right? It's just more of like, well, it's music.
If you were to compare it to like food consumption, it's just like bread. It's like, it's not super flavorful. Yeah. It's not like good for you. It's not as bad. Well, I guess it's bad for you, but you know what I mean?
Somewhere
in
the middle, yeah.
It's a filler.
Okay, so here's a tension that I feel. So I want to go deeper into what you said too, but there's also a tension I feel. There is a huge subjective element to it. And that's one of the things that I think at times annoyed me growing up was there was such a black and white element to it of like, they were defined secular music, but even how they defined it, like, so my brother told you, like, we were restricted even from some Christian music because it had certain instruments, right? Yeah. I remember one of my youth leaders, who was our worship leader, trying to convince us that listening to Christian music in this one specific key was wrong because of how it impacts
stuff
you.
Like that. Yeah.
And I remember just even like as a high schooler being like, that just is the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Doesn't add up.
That doesn't add up because you're trying to take something that's subjective to you and impose it on other people, and that didn't feel right to me.
Yeah.
But there is a subjective element. So like to one person, they would look at a band and say, that's a hard no. But to another person, they can listen to it and it impacts them differently. So so let's talk about, I'm not gonna name artist names. You can. I'm not gonna name them because I don't know the artist well enough. But there are some artists that you listen to that I know of that they do have foul language. Mm-hmm. And I want to be clear. I listen to artists and some of them have foul language. I'm not at all trying to throw you under the bus.
Stones or
that's not what this is about. Which I know everyone just in their mind are going, what did you guys listen to? That's
who are you talking about?
Cussing doesn't freak me out. I'll be really clear. I don't listen to like really vulgar stuff. And I'll tell why in a minute. But anyway, all that said. But foul language in and of itself, as crazy as it sounds, doesn't necessarily drive you away from God. There are some artists that through their language, they're using it to express a point. And so like, I'll give an example. A few years ago, you told me about this Christian band, and this worship leader had a real struggle with going through depression. I mean, like overwhelming, suicidal,
anxiety, suicidal
depression.
Thoughts. Yeah.
He wrote this song, and in the song, he put the F word. You told me about it. This was me and my arrogance. You told me about it. I dismissed it immediately. I was like, Christian leader putting the F word in. I felt like this
shock
was
value.
Yeah, shock value. I felt like this was the old school Amy Grant and those who were like now declaring, I'm no longer a Christian artist. I'm just an artist. I thought like it was like one of those breaks. I did not listen to the song. However much time passed, I was on vacation, and King's Kaleidoscope is the band. I went and listened to the album. I'm not exaggerating. Listened to it for the first time on the beach, and I am like weeping as I'm listening to it. And I text you, and I was like, oh my goodness, I just listened to that song. I get it. Yeah, the F word in that song, I get it.
Yeah.
And then
you
years
get the emotion
later,
of it.
Oh yeah, like it was like to feel this guy's pain. Yeah. And he used, like he said, this is effing violent. What he's
this
feeling
fear
like
is
this,
effing violent. Is what
it was so like years later, I did a sermon and you sang that song. You didn't use the F word because we just thought that would be shock value. It would distract from what we were trying to do. 100%. You changed it. But like in that sermon, we were just talking about that tension and that emotion. So not all cussing in and of itself is a disqualifier, but even then, so here's what I'd push to you to say, how do you walk that line? Yeah. What's cussing that is like, no, and cussing that you're like, no, I get it.
Yeah. You know, for me, here's like a really funny example. So we came out with an album about a year and a few months ago now called Oh Death. And there's a song on it called Pour It Out that we got to co-write with a friend of ours. It was really cool. And this is like for those of you who care about music, you'll think this is really interesting. For those who you don't, just like stick with me for a second because I think the point's interesting. There's a style of music that they play in Puerto Rico. My wife is Puerto Rican, so I'm really familiar with the music from Puerto Rico. It's called Reggaeton music, where it's kind of reggae / hip hop, but it's very specifically Spanish speaking. And what's really funny about it, I thought it was hilarious when I first heard this. It's all the same drum beat for every song. Okay. Which to me as a musician, I'm like, how dull. But it literally just goes boom, ga boom, ga boom, ga boom, ga. Every reggaeton song, if you've heard Daddy Yankee or Bad Bunny, is huge right now. It's reggaeton. Okay. It's from Puerto Rico. And they're blowing up right now, and it all has the same. It might be slower, boom, ga, boom, ga, or faster, boom, ga, boom, ga, boom, ga, boom. Yeah. It's the same drum beat though every time. I don't even know the like whatever the musical expression of it is notated as, but that's the same thing every time. That we used that drum beat on our last album. So on the song Pour It Out, it's like a violet wind, I feel you rushing in. And it just adds this like
from now on when I'm doing this song, I'm gonna be
it just adds this like it's just like almost like tribal feel to it. That's really what we wanted to go for, is this we wanted it to feel kind of anthematic. And Mackie, he's the drummer for Tree.Church Music. That's the drum part he put into it. And when we first played, like, did you hear what I did? And I was like, yeah, love it. Don't change it. Because it just gave that effect that we wanted to go for, where it feels communal. It feels like private. And that's why they use it in their music so much. That to me is why I even entertain music that is sketchy in premise. Because I can sit there as a musician and I'm not processing what they're saying unless it's something ironically Christian or theology driven. Sure. So like my favorite band is the Oh Hellos, and they write concept albums about C.S. Lewis and about creation, and it's beautiful. Then I pay attention. If I'm listening to Bad Bunny, I don't even speak Spanish, right? So it's like, I'm just like, yeah, that's a great vibe, you know? Yeah. But for me, I'm okay to listen to something that has language because that's not the way I'm processing music. I'm not sitting there thinking about what does this actually make me feel. Believe it or not, I'm a more feelings-driven person. Again, if I listen to sad music, I have to really gate that. Like I can't listen to too much of this because I am prone to anxiety and melancholy. And if I indulge that too much, I will feel that. And I'll be in a bad mood and Gina will come and be like, what's going on? I'm like, I don't know. I'll just act generally kind of fussy. And it's like, well, I don't want that in my life where lyrics don't hit as hard. Every once in a while I hear a lyric that's distracting to the music where I'm like, nah, okay, turn it off. You know what I mean? Something really vulgar, something really crass. And I've heard songs like that. We live in the Wild West right now where people are writing some wild lyric songs. Bruno Mars is an artist that sadly I love. Every song is about how much he loves making love though. And I'm like, okay, I cannot listen to there's some songs I just have to skip because it's like, that's not where it's so apparent that I can't just ignore that. Where other songs, the lyrics it feels like filler sometimes where my brain's not processing this. I just really love the feel of the music, and it might even inspire me to try to like create something cool out of that inspiration. So the way I moderate it is exclusively, how is that making me feel? Is it making me feel close to God? Is it making me feel angry or sad? Or is there something that I hear that's like, that makes me feel uncomfortable? Like the Holy Spirit gives you that check in my heart. So it's more based on the Holy Spirit's conviction in my life than it is a hard and fast rule. And movies are a little different, but for music, it's more about that conviction.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because I think, to be fair, there's no set rule, but yet I think each person needs to take an honest stock in it, because I'm the opposite in the sense of like, I can appreciate a music and not know why. I mean, I'm like, okay, this is catchy.
I like the feel.
Yeah, I like the feel of it. But I am almost 100% trying to figure out what they're saying. Like that's where I go to first. So like, oddly enough, it's like almost like I don't hear the music because I'm trying to figure out the lyrics. And that's why, to me, most music gets disqualified real quick.
I believe it. Where if I'm listening to Coldplay or Radiohead, I can't tell you what a single song they've ever written is about. Like one of my favorite songs ever is Yellow by Coldplay. Don't know what it's about. It feels like a love song. Like, look at the stars, they're all yellow. It's like, what does that mean? What does it mean? Like, is that really what the song's about? Right. The objective viewpoint of the stars, and like you were all yellow. I don't know what that means. But to me, I love it. It makes me feel like I want to give my wife a hug. Where it's like, I love it. You know what I mean? I'm so feelings driven with music where it's like lyrics sometimes get in the way of that, ironically.
Yeah. So like one of the things, I do this every year. This is something that goes back like 20 years. It's like
one of my favorite things that you do,
every single year. So I had a desire to stay relevant, whether I was in youth ministry or just I wanted to be relevant.
Yeah, sure.
So, but I don't love listening to just garbage music.
Yeah.
So every single year on vacation, at least one day, I would go through and listen to the top 20 or 50 songs that are popular right then. So like Spotify makes it super easy because they have a playlist.
Great.
So in past years, I would listen to either all of the song or most of the song, and then I would fast forward to the next. Every single year, it gets shorter and shorter, the amount of time I listen to songs. And I think a few years ago was like maybe one of the last times I've done it where I was like 3-4 seconds in, and I was just like, I could not believe the topics of the songs.
Truly insane.
Wild. I mean, talking about women's parts and different things, like in the most vulgar terms, guys' parts. And I was just, oh wow, just fast forward like 3 or 4 seconds.
It's so sexualized right now.
Yeah, and then every once in a while there would be a song in there that I would really connect to, and I would go like, ooh, I like that theme. I like it. I like what they're talking about, the tension of like one song I can even think of in my mind. This girl was talking about how like basically she doesn't feel normal in any setting that she's in, and like even though I couldn't relate in the sense I don't feel that way, I was like feeling her pain, and I appreciate
Which
it like
beautiful.
Art. Yeah, it was like
that's
I go to like Mary and I, when we go to an art place, we both walk into the room, art place, a museum, art place. I sound real cultured there, don't I? But we walk into a room, something we do, we go, all right, figure out what painting is your favorite in the room, and I'm gonna do the same. And then I try to guess hers, she tries to guess mine.
Oh, that's a cool idea.
And then we both explain why it's our favorite painting, why in that room. And there are times you'll look at a painting and you're just like, I don't even know why. Like there's this painting I can have in my mind, just the anguish that's on the guy's face.
Yeah, powerful.
And I was like, ooh, like, and I was like, I relate to it.
Yeah.
I talked about that. My favorite song ever, the one that you wrote, Haunted House. I so related to it. It was like, yes. So there are parts of music that does that, but the reason I was saying that, the person they have to really be honest and take stock. Is this song even celebrating and putting concepts into my life that are displeasing to God and shaping my understanding 100%. Of life and values?
I think we'll probably talk about this in a little bit when we talk about parenting. That's what scares the heck out of me with kids. It's like, boy, I know how to articulate my feelings now. I feel an intimate relationship on a daily basis with the Holy Spirit that I've spent years refining submission to the Holy Spirit.
Sure.
To this day. There are things that I know. There are times that I ignore the Holy Spirit. Okay. I know that tension.
You're probably going to do it, but I'm just saying in case you're not. Explain that more. I want you to explain that, what that means, because I think that is the key, is in a world, because one of my questions I wrote down in here is, how do we stay current but not identical to the world?
100%.
Because that's what happens is we want to stay current, and then all of a sudden we're just mimicking the world. So like, how is that divide? How is the Holy Spirit leading you in that tension?
To me, the Holy Spirit dictates my behavior. And if there's something I'm putting in my life, in my body, in my thoughts, in my ears, in my eyes, that is pulling me away from the Holy Spirit, or that I feel a check from him, that something feels wrong or makes me feel distant or would make me feel embarrassed, then I'm in sin. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then it's like, this is for kids, this is a great litmus test. Would you do this in front of your grandma? the answer is no. Like that's the great Holy Spirit test. Like a similar like feeling of shame of like, oh, she'd be really embarrassed if she saw me acting or listening to this, or if she heard this. So for me, if I'm listening to something, so for instance, you mentioned a song about like people's body parts. I know exactly what song you're talking about. It was so huge. It was so vulgar. Like you can't look past, like the second I heard it, I'm like, whoa, if I were just to power through that and be like, oh, the beat's good. I'm now being intellectually dishonest. I'm ignoring the prompting from the Holy Spirit. The second I have a check in something, or like I said, this is the other emotional maturity side, I feel my mood shift. And all of a sudden I'm feeling things that God does not have for me. He doesn't want me feeling anxious. He doesn't want me feeling angry. Those aren't fruits of the Spirit.
Right.
There's something that's going to contradict that. That's where you have to have the maturity to say, I don't want this in my life right now.
Yeah.
So if you can manage something, if you can listen to a cool hip hop song, like, man, I love the beat. I love that. Even appreciate, you said the anguish in someone's face, appreciate the frustration. Be like, oh, like I love the passion in his voice. Like you listen to Eminem and the anger that man has, and the way, like, there's something respectful about it of like, man, does that feel, you know, and I might freak out just by saying Eminem because he has got quite a few vulgar songs, but to appreciate someone's craft and to feel their pain with them, and then to be able to not be distracted or not feel far from God. If anything, value God's creation more, to have your heart break and be like, man, I want to love people better. Yeah. That's more what I'm talking 100%. About.
So Eminem, I think, I don't say this with exaggeration, especially his earlier stuff. He could quite possibly be one of the greatest American poets of all time.
100%.
I mean, his lyrics, so he has some songs that are just, you categorize them in the stupid, silly, vulgar, unnecessary. But he has some that you're like, his way with words and rhyming and rhythm, you're like, this guy is incredible. But again, in order to get to that, you have to weed through a lot of garbage. And so you have to know that and its impact on you. You know, what's interesting, as you were talking about the mood, one of the things that happens, this is not fair, but one of the things that happens in my mind, I think you're wired the same way, is as I'm saying something, I'm picturing a person arguing with me. So I'm having these imaginary arguments with someone. So you're talking about mood or talking about songs and different things. And I'm like, you know, some people would hear us talk about these things and go like, no, there's no Eminem song, you know, and whatever. There's no this or that. And that same person will watch the news and get disturbed by the news and destroy their emotions. Exactly. And you're like,
dude, this is social media.
The content that's taken in.
Absolutely. Whether it's social media, whether it's news, mood moderation and understanding, is this bringing more spiritual fruit in my life? Can I listen to an Eminem song and be like, man, do I appreciate talent and the plight of the human condition? Or am I angry and sad now? Two very different things. Can I watch this news and be like, man, I should pray? Or am I now frustrated at a political party or a person, or just nervous, or very different responses? And that's what I mean by, like, if you don't have the maturity to moderate what the Holy Spirit is putting on your heart, you have disqualified yourself from responsibly consuming secular content. That's kind of like a big thing. But if you're not in a place in your faith, or if you're not in a place of submission to the Spirit, where you know when to turn it off, like, this is not good for who God wants me to be right now. If you can't articulate, and that's, again, it freaks me out with kids because they're probably by nature not able to do that.
And we'll talk about children later, because this, I want to be really clear. We're talking about two adults. We're not talking about a standard for our kids.
I'm not talking about standards for kids,
Okay, so for me, part of my standard very much is the goal. The goal, I want to get closer to Christ. And so for me, the things that like are just immediate no-goes for me, anything with nudity, because like I'm making a transition. So obviously we're not talking about music anymore. We're talking about TVs and movie and what other things. Anything with nudity, I would say, for the obvious reasons, it would stir up lust in my heart. I've made a commitment, you know, as Job said, I made a commitment not to look at things lustfully. So I try to honor that in my life. Things with cussing. Not all cussing, but there are some shows that have an extreme amount of cussing. And this is the rhythm for me is, I've started watching shows, actually liked the shows, like the tension or whatever, but there's so much cussing that throughout the day, I start hearing cussing in my head. I start having that. And to me, I go, that's a no-go, because I just don't want that. Shows with really dark themes that are going to stay with me, it's a no-go because of my goal. I don't want to feel that way. Mary and I will not watch shows where the major theme of the show is adultery. It just bothers us. Someone recommended this show and we started watching it and realized early on that this entire season, the whole theme was the tension between this guy having an affair. And Mary and I watched part of the first episode and we're like, we're out. You know?
Done. Absolutely.
But that's just us. Anything that has like dark evil. So like, we talk about horror movies, but I don't think you even like these style. Anything that has a demonic theme to it is a no-go for me.
Absolutely. I can watch a movie about a guy with a knife, because that to me has no demonic intent. I can just objectify it and almost make, like, I can understand the excitement of like, oh, that's so scary. The moment something touches on the spiritual side, I am out.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, because I don't know. I actually have an interesting like conviction about this, or not even a conviction, like more of a something I don't really know what I believe is that like I always thought it was kind of hogwash. Like as a kid, when people are like, oh, you don't know what doors are opening. In college, I thought like, I'm a spirit-filled Christian. Like, what am I going to accidentally consume that's going to outdo, it's going to get the whole, blaspheme the Holy Spirit out of my life, and I'm going to be demonically possessed. So I don't know that I believe in that, but I do believe in some nature of opening up doorways in your life to things that should be closed. 100%. I don't know how to articulate it in a way that's like biblically accurate, but like, because I know I'm still filled with the Spirit. But the second, like if I were to watch The Exorcism, or I watched it in college and I loved it, I wouldn't watch it again. A movie called The Conjuring, because it's made really well and it's actually supposed to be like accurate to the Catholic Church and how to like expose demons. There's no way I'd put that in my house right now, you know, because that's a hard line for me too. Because I can appreciate a movie. Like I loved Scream. We talked about that. I loved Scream when I was in high school. Like it's just a person with a knife, and who's the killer? I don't know. It's interesting. Demonic stuff freaks me out. And I'm the same way with a couple things you mentioned.
Think my fear of demonic stuff is to some degree desensitizing to it. Something that that's you scary. Should have a healthy fear and respect of, right?
Well, I'd even say there's Christian content to read. I was given, you know, Frank Peretti, he's a Christian author. I was given way too young by my grandpa. I think he thought he was doing me a favor.
That's Brandon's favorite author.
Is it really? You know what? I think we recently talked about this. I don't think he likes this book specifically, but he wrote 2 books pretty early on called This Present Darkness and Into the Darkness, and they are dark. They're as dark as a title. Where like I remember reading the first thing, and it was all about this lady. It felt very apocalyptic. I quit reading it quick because it scared the heck out of me. I was way too young. There's this lady who was in a church, and there was a demon crawling behind like the cross on the wall. And it was a Christian author basically explaining that there's things unseen. World, but I'm like, nope. Like, so even stuff like that, you need to responsibly consume where it's like, I don't want thoughts of demons in my head. I don't want, that's the same thing to this day where it's like, I don't want to consume anything like that. Same thing with nudity. That's a hard line where it's like, I've known people to say, I mean, we've heard crazy stuff from people in ministry. I remember a guy told me once, I don't think he went here, this is years ago. He said like, yeah, I go to strip clubs and I minister to people. And I was like, you know, I don't know if I believe you. It's like maybe that's possible, but I would never ever roll the dice on that. On the off chance that I'm gonna, not, you know, I'm not.
And be clear, there are people. We have women in our church that would go to a strip club, stay outside and minister to the strippers, but like,
which is incredible ministry. Talk about a guy who's going to strip, and I'm just like, I don't believe that's possible. Or like, there's stuff that I don't think. So even nudity in a show. You mentioned language. Language doesn't bother me, but vulgarity does. Sure, so it's weird. If I hear a bunch of language, but somebody makes a sexual comment, whether he's language or not, that's a disqualifier for me where it's like, it immediately distracts me. I'm like, don't want that in my life.
Yeah. You know, what's interesting with this is, so my wife is like ultra sensitive to stuff. We went and saw, I always get this name wrong.
A Quiet Place?
A Quiet Place. Yeah. You know the story. So we went and saw it and loved it. So that's an idea of a movie that's like super suspenseful. It's like, you know, aliens that respond to noise. Mary probably did not watch 75% of the movie. She just like looked down. And so when I went and saw the follow-up to it, which was just as good as the original, those are 2 incredible movies. I didn't take her. I was like, good call. I'm gonna go with my other guy friends. But Mary has like a real like sensitivity to violence and stuff. Violence doesn't feel like it impacts me because I'm never tempted to be violent. After like I could watch a shoot 'em up movie, and I'm not going to go outside and shoot them up. You know, like
our minds are so tricky like that. Where again, I can watch the same movie. I don't want to go be violent, but I listen to too much like West Coast style hip hop, and I do feel angry.
Sure, right? Like, yeah, I agree.
It's hard. Our minds are tricky, and that's where it takes spiritual maturity. Like, what is the Spirit of God pressing me into in this moment? Do I feel that conviction? That's where it's so messy. It's like, man, if you ignore it once, you're going to ignore it again too. It's a volatile line.
I remember a year or 2 ago, I like basically shamed a good chunk of our staff.
I remember.
You know what this is? Is this about the Bachelorette or Bachelor or whatever? Yeah. Like it was one of those moments where I was that guy, but like everyone was talking about. I want to even say, were you guys betting on it or getting
betting?
What was it?
I did and won, by the way, a fantasy bracket.
So
this is horrifying. I'm not recommending this. It's so gross. But you'd watch The Bachelor and they'd have all like 20 of these guys come in, and there's one girl, which is such a preposterous premise. But you do a fantasy draft where it's awful. You watch their intros and then you hit pause and everyone drafts who they think is going to win. And that's like, for me, it's like, I'm not a big reality TV fan, but I love winning. And I'm like, all right, this is my game. I'm in on this.
Okay, so you guys were all doing it. You're all talking about it. And I was just like, I think The Bachelor is a portal to hell. Let me explain why.
The premise is adultery.
Yeah, right. And I just blasted it, and everyone was like, yeah. And I was like, I knew I killed it, but I was like, you know. And the same thing, like, I don't know if our staff, I'm being genuine, I don't know if they watch this or not, but talking to people about like that show Dahmer. Yeah. And I was like, man, you guys, you don't need to know much about this story to know that show is going to mess with you.
Yeah. I couldn't watch that. He's from my hometown, so it was too close to home. I couldn't watch it. But that's another one that I heard.
No one watched it.
I heard it got so vile. It was just no accurate one watched to what happened. Said like, I felt better after that. You're not going to convince me that.
And so like, that's the thing. We were talking about this when right before we came on, we were just giving some opening thoughts where we're going. But I said, like, there have been times where there have been people that are like, man, I'm really struggling with being anxious. And then they're listening to a serial killer podcast. And you're like, you have to.
Such a high volume of people.
You have to connect these things, right? Okay. So in your life, when it comes, I think we've been pretty clear. When it comes to what we're consuming, we have to really take stock in how it's impacting us.
Yeah.
And I think that's what a lot of people aren't doing. We're so used, and in many ways have become so desensitized to it. So like, here's another thing that really stands out as a shocker to me in my own personal spirit is when this is, so as I say this, I'm saying I'm convicting myself on this one. On Saturdays, I am in sermon mode. So like on Saturdays, I come to the church early. I pray for our staff. I pray for the service. I pray for myself. I go over my notes. I am like in tune for Sunday. I can't watch things on Saturday that I could watch other days of the week.
That totally makes sense.
And the Holy Spirit, though, has been challenging me on that. Or some of it are going like, why is it okay Monday through Friday, and on Saturday there's like this hypersensitivity to it, and it really has caused me to like even get rid of a couple of things where I'm going, if I couldn't watch it then, and some of it is I just don't want to be distracted, and there's nothing wrong with it. I'm just like, no, I want to stay focused. Yeah. But if I watch something and have that like, I don't want that in my spirit because I'm in sermon mode, I thought, well, why would I want that in my spirit the rest of the day? So Absolutely. Like that has raised my level of sensitivity to that. But the last thing I want to talk about before we transition to parenting, and I don't know that we have a lot to say about that, but is social media. Social media is one of those things that it has now been unquestionably connected to impacting people's moods.
Yeah.
So like scientifically proven. They've done all these studies.
We're talking published studies. It's not someone's opinion. It's not a talking point. Public studies. Yeah.
Yeah. And from reputable companies, not not just like people that we like and we're saying, this one church did it.
Nope.
They've come out Facebook, Instagram, and now TikTok. Mm-hmm. And even TikTok has recognized that it negatively impacts kids' moods. Like it impacts their identity, impacts their confidence, makes them insecure, body image, all these things. Now, even with all of them, because there's a hypersensitivity in our culture that anyone that would speak out against certain things, specifically against homosexuality, transgender, any of those issues, anyone that would give a counterpoint that might come across as against those things, they're now banning those voices and only allowing a those message. And so kids are being exposed to one side of an argument literally hours a day. Wow. So like they had one video of a person that transitioned, was a female, transitioned to be a male, and had a surgery to remove her breast, and posted videos and stuff. It was viewed 30 million plus times.
Goodness.
And there's no way to know what the age bracket is of those watching something like that. So we know in our lives social media does this, and yet there are a lot of adults that are addicted to it. Mm-hmm. But we also know it does this, and we're allowing children access to it.
Yeah.
And so like, let's just kind of talk about social media for a moment, and then let's pivot to like our final thoughts of like, as parents, if a parent's listening, like, how can we help protect our kids? Yeah. Because I do think that's something not as simple as black and white. Yeah, but let's just talk about social media, how it impacts us. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Have you heard of the term doom scrolling?
I have not.
It's a pretty popular term where basically people get caught in a TikTok trap or on YouTube. You ever went like a black hole on YouTube is what they call it?
All the time. Yeah.
Where YouTube is brilliant. Like there's a reason why these companies are billions and billions and billions of dollars.
Yeah.
They are great at an algorithm, which they know by whatever their algorithm is, by the volume of numbers, by your age, by the things you've consumed. They know how to recommend stuff that you're likely want to see as well. I fell into one this last weekend where I started by watching clips from the Ken Burns Civil War documentary. Okay. That's how I know I just turned 30. That's what I do in my free time. I just think it is just so interesting. So I'm watching this thing, and like 3 hours later, I was just like, my kids are in the living room hanging out, and I'm like cleaning.
3 hours later, you had a pair of white New Balances on.
I'm grilling outside. 3 hours later, I was watching a documentary about like the Celtic people and how I'm like, how did I get into this one? Because you're just like falling down this trap of that's also interesting, and they're really good at creating these algorithms. The problem is, what do we know about famously the news? Is like, what did they? I just heard in a podcast recently, like blood first gets views first, something like that. When they talk about
if it bleeds, it leads.
If it bleeds, it leads. That's it.
Yeah.
If it bleeds, it leads. If it's negative, people eat it up. Nobody wants to hear about the positive stuff. Since I was a kid, the news is worse than ever now, probably. But even when the news only out a couple times a day, the leading stuff would often be, double homicide in Chicago, like that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So doom scrolling is you get trapped into an algorithm on whether it be TikTok or YouTube or Instagram, anybody who does reels, anything like that. They know, like, once you start watching the scary thing or the sad thing, it gives you more, and then you're stuck and you watch that and you watch that. Then all of a sudden 2 hours go by and you're depressed and you're sad and you're heartbroken and you're angry. I get angry a lot. I usually don't look at sad stuff, but I'll get stuff that I feel like outrage, where I'm like, they did what? Like, you've got to be kidding me. Yeah. Or I'll fall into a news trap of being like, I'll go so deep into a story of like, in like, oh, this person thinks this. And it just ruins my quality of life. Yeah. I don't feel closer to the Holy Spirit when I'm done. Yeah. I don't feel like I have more spiritual fruit in my life. I don't feel edified. I don't feel compelled to go evangelize to people. I'm just sad and angry. And they call it doom scrolling, and it's a secular term. I'm not just talking about Christianity. People are recognizing and addressing it, that they'll just fall into these black holes, and it destroys your mind. It destroys your quality of life. And that's where, the whole concept of like, what comes in is what comes out. I wrote in the Bible verse, if your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out, throw it away, because it is better to have one less eye than go to hell, and for your whole body to be destroyed as well. So for me, I think about like, if you're in that space where you're consuming this content and it is leading you into sadness, if it's leading you into things that are not glorifying God, I quit Facebook for like a year. It is incredible. And now and you know what's funny? I have Facebook again now. It doesn't bum me out anymore. I laugh at stuff more. Yeah. Where I'll see something that used to make me feel enraged. I just don't take it that seriously, because I had this volume of time away where I was like, I don't take Facebook that seriously. If you're in that place where you're getting bummed out by stuff, just take a sabbatical, and maybe your perspective might change. And like, because it is better just to get rid of it than to be far from the Holy Spirit and to be desensitized.
Agree. So on social media, I found myself, there's two things with social media that I didn't like. One was anytime I had a down second, I just pulled my phone out. So like if I'm out in public and went to social media, and I didn't like that. I didn't like the fact that like I trained myself not to have any downtime mentally, so I had to go to it. Next thing is I didn't like that I was looking for likes, in the sense of I'm not literally meaning likes, but I was looking for engagement. And like there was part of me that was like, I don't like the way that feels either. And then the third part of it was I was annoyed with people. People were posting stuff and I'm reading it, and I was judging them, and I was mad at them, and I was frustrated. Yeah. So I took Instagram and Facebook off of my phone, and I only access it through the computer, which I have to be honest, there's most days I forget about it, legitimately forget about it. And I'm like, oh, I haven't been on there. Maybe I should check that. Because I'll post, and if you see me post stuff, like I'll post the sermons or something with the church on social media, I get on and I'm on and off in like 30 seconds, oftentimes not even reading my notification. So I just warn, if anyone's trying to notify or connect to me that way, it's not the way to connect to me. And then Instagram, like even the other day, I had to figure out how to post on Instagram because I wanted to post pictures of my kids. They were in a musical, and I had to do it through my computer. And I was like trying to figure it out because I was like, I'm not even sure how to do this. Which is funny. When I told you this, your literal response is, you can access Instagram on your computer.
Didn't even know that was a thing. Yeah, wild. Yeah, so far because I've never. Right. It's always been a phone app for me. Yeah,
but I'll tell you, I mean this genuinely. It has been good for my heart.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I like it. I feel cleaner. I feel like less bogged down because I don't have access to it. Now I have TikTok on my phone. My algorithm is dog videos. I love dog videos and theology. So it's like this weird thing. I had to even get off because there was this bent where I was watching all these videos of people criticizing churches. Yeah. And it was like firing me up. Yeah. And because it was so like some of their arguments are legit. So like I'm all about accountability. There's some of them I'm like, oh, why are they so dumb? Why would you do that? Yeah. And there's other ones I'm like, oh, that's not even fair. Yeah. You're just hating on. But I was realizing I don't want that. I don't want to watch TikTok because I can't fix any of these things. And so I manipulated the algorithm by just like disliking these videos and then liking all dog videos. Stuff you want to see. So my thing is like solid theology guys that I like, dog videos, and some funny other ones like that. I'll send them to you or you'll send them to me, and that gets in our algorithm. But because again, it's for a purpose. What's my goal? TikTok can meet my goal, but the moment it doesn't, then I'm like, it's out. And that was what social media, it was not part of my goal. It was not allowing my heart to be pure. It was not allowing my heart to feel light. And so I had to get rid of it, and it was better for it.
Yeah, and I think responsibly consumed, that stuff is great. Like social media, I do it. I have like a side music project called Mudhouse. Social media is great for that. Like the amount of, this is unbelievable. The amount of people that I get messages from all over through social media, like, hey, I heard this song, and it's like
crazy, right?
It is never ceases to blow my mind. Never ceases to blow my mind. Yeah. And without social media, that's not possible. Yeah. TikTok, I mean it, done appropriately, is a massive blessing. My TikTok feed is funny stuff that I find funny, is lawn care, is like theology. And it's like that, it really is more entertaining to me than a TV show. So I remember when I was a kid, my dad would come home and it's like ESPN, and he's like in his world now. For me, I'll take a half hour and just laugh. Me and Gina, like, you know how you and Mary, you would watch a TV show before bed? Me and Gina will like, that's like a nightly ritual, is we'll pick, all right, whose algorithm are we watching? We'll just watch the 10 minutes of it together and just crack up or talk about whatever interesting thing. It can be really beautiful. Yeah. It can also wreck your mind. Sure. You know? So it's all about that response. It's like anything else we're talking about, movies, music. Yeah. Responsible consumption. Is this edifying to me? Is this bumming me out? Is it bringing more spiritual fruit into my life? Yeah. Is it, or I don't want to over spiritualize everything. Is it just nice? Like, does it make me laugh? Is it, you know what I mean? I think that's valuable too.
Right, I want to transition and talk one last thing, but I'm going to ask you a funny question. Yeah. Did you see that TikTok video of this wheel comes off a pickup truck and goes right in front of this Kia? And it launches this Kia in the air. It is crazy. I'll send it. My brother Chris sent it to me, but I'll send it to you. Okay, so final thing. All right, so you and I, this is one thing, I'm going to be honest, it's going to be a little bit harder because you're going to speak in somewhat concepts because your children
kids are so young.
But the reason why I'm asking you, and I'm going to speak to it too, because I have walked through this with my kids, we did have an extreme, and I think both of us would agree the extreme was not the ideal.
Yeah, I agree with that.
There's good of it, right? Like,
sure.
If you're going to err on protecting your kids versus the opposite of the parents who give kids free access to the internet and social media and don't monitor it, I think that's way
If you're going to do one extreme, I would rather be the conservative extreme. Yeah.
But there can be a better version of it. Yeah. I'm going to speak a little bit of my thoughts, but I want you to speak to like as you think through. And for me and my kids, we've chosen to shield them from certain things. So we have shielded them from anything sexual to the best of our ability. I'd say that. So we have locks on their phones. Our kids don't have social media. My oldest son has one form of social media that is monitored, but that's it. They don't have any other social media. It's constant tension. My kids are not thrilled about it. And I'm not even saying this will always be this way, but we're just saying like until we can be confident, we can monitor it and its impact. And so there's that restriction. We have, like, growing up, I would show my kids a movie. I would edit it through VidAngel, or there's another one called ClearPlay. Takes out nudity, takes out cussing. I'd probably never show them a movie that the real version had nudity in it at this age, but taking out cussing and stuff like that. But then as I've gotten older, I've allowed more of that, just realizing they've been exposed to it. And the ongoing joke with my kids, literally to this day, it's dad humor. Every single time we go and see a movie together, before we walk in, I go, guys, you're going to hear words in this movie that I don't want you to repeat. And they're like, we get it, Dad. Yeah. But that's my way of saying, like, just acknowledging there are different systems of values. Okay. But with my kids, what I've chosen to do is allow them in a responsible way to be exposed to things, but with conversation, right? Like I want to have conversations. I want to talk to them. I don't want to create such restrictions on them that they're feeling the need to sneak it. And now they develop a culture of, where they have to hide things from me, and where that becomes a part of that rhythm of like worse and worse things that they learn the habit of hiding. I'm not naive. I know my kids are seeing stuff that I don't want them to see. For sure. I'm not happy about that, but overall we've tried our best to protect. But even then with music, I haven't taken a hard line of, like my kids like some secular artists, and I'm not like all secular artists are out, I'll hear my kids playing a song on the piano and I'm like, good grief, if I would have played that growing up, like I would have got in trouble. You're grounded. Well, it's funny. I don't think I've ever even heard this song, but Dr. Dre, the famous, like I heard Lincoln playing that on the piano at one point, and I was like, he probably doesn't even know that song. Mm-hmm. Like I'm really confident he doesn't.
It's a famous piano riff.
It's a famous piano part, but I've heard him play like a Beatles song. Like growing up, the Beatles were like next to Satan, like in the Christian church, right?
Absolutely.
And like my kids, there's songs of theirs that they've liked, but I've had conversations with them about it. I'm like, let me tell you this song. Let's listen to it. This song is talking about this value system. So I think the better way is purpose based on the goal, shield them, but as they get older, having conversations with them as you're exposing to different things so that you build a relationship. We can talk about this, but they also understand values and why it is to it.
Yeah, that's super good.
What's your thoughts?
Yeah, so, I mean, my oldest is 4 and my youngest is like 1.5, or she's about to turn 2. And I've got 3 kids, so they're all really young. They're all really close in age. We haven't had to have those conversations. The shows they want to watch are cartoons, and they're, and we moderate that of like, it's going to sound, I hated this when I was a kid, so I feel like it's such a nerd saying it now. My parents would like shield us from cartoons that had disrespectful kids to their parents.
Wow, we do this.
I do that now though. I know what you learn.
There's a lot of Disney shows that have
unbelievable,
like an attitude toward parents, and we would.
Isn't that bizarre? When I was a kid, Nickelodeon was huge, and then cartoons were awful. It was like Red and Stimpy and Cat Dog, and they were awful. Like they rude people, and so my parents wouldn't let us watch that. So I do that now. Like I make sure that they're so young, they watch what we introduce them to. They wouldn't even know to go try to sneak something in, which makes my answer all in theory. But what it's based on, so I cannot say there's any authority, but what it's based on is a value system that you told me probably my first year working here. This is like 8 years ago now. I remember you saying something like, when your kids, and I don't want to out them, we can edit this out later if it's going to make them feel uncomfortable. You said that anytime your kids asked a question about sex or sexual ethics or anything along those lines, your response was so smooth. You're like, that's a really good question. I remember you telling me, even if it was wild, when you're even if you're in your head, you're like, where did you hear that word or that thing? You were calm, cool, collected. You're like, that's a really good question. Let me explain it to you exactly what it is. Explain the value system behind it, what you believe is right and wrong when it regards to that, and then move on. That is like one of the best pieces of advice I've ever heard. So now when I was a kid, it was outrage culture. It was outrage culture about, we're so mad this movie, that Disney did this thing or this. That's less scary to me now. I'm interested to see, I want to protect them from things that are going to damage their brains, but when they're eventually exposed to it, because I mean, if we're being honest, they're going to go to school. Like you remember what it was like in junior high. You went to a private school, but I'm sure even then, like, goodness, like the things you're probably confronted with or heard people say, even at a Christian school, are probably wild.
Right.
So it's like, I know they're going to be exposed to stuff. I want to keep such an open thing. If they hear a song that has a sexual theme, if they hear something that I think has a dark theme or sad, or even if they are listening to sad music. I saw a TikTok of this baby, like 2 years old, listening to, I don't remember what the song was. Say Something, I'm Giving Up on You. Crying, this kid. And I'm like, I don't want my kid to be experience that kind of sadness so young, and because they feel things so deeply. I want to handle it with an open hand of when you hear stuff, I want to be a safe person for you to talk to about it, to explain what we believe, what the ethics are, why that might be a good thing, why it might be a bad thing, and to kind of handle things open-handed like that. Shield from things that we think might be damaging, but understanding that they're probably going to consume and hear stuff anyways. So not to give it to them, but to try to explain as much as possible. This is why we don't think that's good. Like, so this is why I don't want you to listen to that. Not just where my parents, and again, I'm not trying to dog on my parents. It was just a prohibition. It was like, never listen to Green Day. And then I heard my first Green Day song. I'm like, what? This is rad. Like, where maybe if I heard things or if I noticed it or I heard on the radio, like, yeah, well, you just hear this. This is why we don't, that to me feels like the more logical thing. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm so green at it. Like, so I don't know.
Right. No, and that's what Mary and I have chosen is, so everything you said is true. Like we always celebrated the questions, and there were times I was very frustrated that my kids were exposed to those things.
It's gotta be tough.
Yeah. A lot of like kids are using this word. I don't even know what this word means, like that type of deal. Yeah. But we wanted to build a culture where we could talk about stuff. And we wanted to build a culture where truth was really truth. And I was afraid if you just say blanket statements across like all this is bad, they'll have that moment of disillusionment like you had where your mom's listening to it and and you're like, wait a second, so what else were they saying that's not true? And so like I wanted to be like very specific. This song is out, this band is out because of
and
this,
here's
this
why.
Movie. Here's why. But then other things. So like even yesterday, my kids are consistently, so twice this week, two different, my sons texted me and said, can I watch this show specifically? And I had to say in both of their situations, no, not to that show. So one of them, it's not yet. Your 2 older brothers, yes, but we waited until this point. To you, it's not yet. And then my oldest son had texted me because he was just looking for new shows. And I said, no to that show you just asked me because I've seen it and I don't love a part of it. but here's 2 shows that I like that I think you would like. And so in the 2 shows I recommended, there's going to be things that I don't like, and his promise is he'll fast forward through certain stuff, but there's going to be some language in it. But overall, they're good shows. Yeah. They're on main TV shows. Just give context. It's not like HBO Max or something.
But man, I think that's so powerful because it's already teaching them the nuanced thought of like, yes, you're gonna like welcome to the rest of your life. You're gonna hear people talk in a way that you don't identify with, you think is irresponsible, you think is silly. But it's like, as long as you can promise me that you're in an emotionally mature enough place where that's not going to influence or color the way you talk, the way you think, and being able to, and this is where that convicted me as you said that, is a reminder to me that I always want to have an intimate enough relationship with my kids that I know where they're at in that process. You can't make an informed decision like that if you don't know your kids. You know your kids. You have legit relationship with your kids. So you know, like even for you to say that, no to this one still has some stuff, but you know how to answer that question because you have a relationship with your kids. I want to so intimately know where my kids' brains are at, where their emotional health is at. What is a stumbling point where I know, no, the one time this wasn't, I want to have that relationship where I can make an informed decision, not a blanket, never this or always this.
I'll tell you this. So one of my sons listens to the podcast, which is funny because he always texts me and he enjoys it. But I will say this, we don't have the same standard for all of our kids. And that's probably would be shocking to some people. We actually know their personalities well enough that...
Oh man, so it's almost like your education thing where it's like this carte blanche, everybody learn everything. Like, your sons, which ones, that's super good.
And they have different personalities. And so like what they want, and it would be, I would never even explain it to them. So like, even if my son comes to me and goes, what are the different standards? I wouldn't explain it to him because it's something I don't want to define, but mom and I know, it's like, it's that thing of like, we know if we allowed you to watch this or have this or be exposed to this, it would impact you differently even than your siblings because of how it is.
God made your personality.
So each of my kids is that way. You have a different personality. Super good. You're a different season of life. So, all right, last question has nothing. It has kind of to do with this, but so what's your favorite? Do you have a favorite movie, band, and TV show all time?
Sure.
Favorite movie?
Sure. So in the nature of this conversation of consuming media responsibly, I'm not going to lie. I'm going to tell you the truth. My favorite movie to this day is Scream, the one that came out in like 1996. Yeah. I like it's nostalgic to me. The way that movie was made was supposed to be, most movies are try to be made where you don't know what time it came out because they want it to be forever. This was the opposite. They hired the guy who wrote Dawson's Creek, which is like hilarious, but it's like so timed. It feels like my childhood. It looks the way things looked. It's nostalgic. It's not demonic. I enjoy suspense movies. It's a whodunit, which is like I just want
to be clear. If you have not seen this movie, there's a lot of murder in this movie.
There's a lot of people are getting stabbed. That's a big part of it. And but that's the warning of like, if you hear that and you're like, that would make me feel uncomfortable, make me feel sad, make me feel anxious, don't watch it. Like, trust that feeling.
Yeah, you have to justify it. So you like Scream?
Yeah. Scream is probably like, I wish I could lie, but by volume, that's the movie I've probably seen most. It's just the most like nostalgic for me. Music, I have 2 answers because they really are hard to like pick one over the other. For worship music, Hillsong United, I know every song from every album. I think the way Joel Houston and that church has been through such a mess of a situation. Maybe we could do a podcast about really just like church and how mega churches and what that looks like in today's like, state. But man, their music always hits for me. Like I genuinely love every song. Sure. I'm so lucky that I've been a worship leader for like 15 years now, and I love worship music. Not everybody can say that. I genuinely have a passion for it. They're my all-time favorite worship team. For bands, it goes back and forth. It changes a lot. I love Radiohead and Wilco are probably the 2 that I go back and forth between the most. Most people who aren't musicians don't like it as much. It's kind of more challenging time signatures and weird music stuff. But as a musician, you hear it, and I'm like, these guys are great. So those are probably my answers.
TV show?
TV show, Stranger Things.
Okay.
You know what's funny about Stranger Things? I wasn't alive in the 80s, but it makes me nostalgic for the 80s. I'm obviously, now as I'm saying this, a nostalgia-driven person.
When were you born?
92.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, 92. Yeah. So I wasn't around, but like the whole thing makes me feel like, oh, what a cool time. I love Stranger Things.
You were 5 years old when I graduated high school. That's funny.
That's wild.
For me,
what about
you? Movie is Inception.
Great answer. I wish I had a cool answer like that, like Interstellar, Inception.
Well, I like both of those, Interstellar and Inception. Music, Jeremy Riddle is my favorite worship leader. I love his stuff. And U2 was a favorite band growing up. I don't like some of the more recent stuff.
I don't either.
But there's a good stretch. I mean, they have like 5 or 6 solid albums that I would listen to over and over. TV shows a little bit harder for me. But Mary and I are watching a show called Elementary. It's like modern Sherlock Holmes. This is our second time through, and we just love that show. So yeah,
that's super good.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Always, if this is something that you find interesting, share it with family, friends, and just tune back in because we appreciate that. And if you ever have any suggestions of something you want us to talk about, send them in. You can send them in to info@Tree.Church. And we'd love to take those considerations. And even if it's not a topic we would spend an entire session on, what we might do is in one of our upcoming episodes, just have random topics that we're just going to kind of go through a list. So I'd love to hear some of those topics. Have a blessed day, and we'll see you next time.